Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Coming up on today's show, in 6 weeks' time, the UK will hold a general election. After 14 years of Conservative rule that brought 5 Prime Ministers, Brexit, Boris Johnson's chaotic COVID-era premiership, and the market-roiling 49-day tenure of Liz Truss. Every opinion poll in the country now suggests Labour's Sir Keir Starmer will replace Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. And we, of course, will be discussing that throughout the first part of the show with Simon Pusey, our Downing Street correspondent, Professor Prem Sikka, a sitting member of the House of Lords, and Harry Burns, the Vice President of consultancy firm Crestview Strategy, who will be joining me from Kigali in Rwanda. And under the theme Creative Industry as a Vehicle for Economic Growth, prominent leaders from across various sectors in Nigeria gathered in London last weekend to participate at the Duke's Economic Summit. We were there with our camera and we'll be sharing some of the backstage highlights with you. Then later, I'll be sharing a discussion I had earlier in the week with Dr. Anino Emua, the founder of 100 Women at Davos, about women philanthropists in Africa and how they have become instrumental in driving social change and supporting community development. But first, voters will go to the polls on July the 4th as Rishi Sunak finally named the date for the general election. The Prime Minister has been under pressure for some months to call a vote, and in a statement outside Downing Street, a rain-soaked Sunak said King Charles had granted his request to dissolve Parliament. His election gamble comes just weeks after the Tories lost almost 500 council seats across England in its worst result at the local elections in 40 years. Labour has maintained a double-digit poll lead for more than a year in a sign that the public has grown weary of Tory chaos after 14 years in power. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our Downing Street correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, we're going to have a busy couple of weeks. We have tried to predict when Rishi Sunak would call a general election. I think even most of the senior Tory MPs were pretty surprised. July the 4th, what has led him to decide to go so early, do you think?
Well, I think the element of surprise is really the only thing that Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives have going into this, or had. The element of surprise, they are able to call the general election, they're able to prepare. And I think the main confusing factor is that that's now gone, the element of surprise. So why didn't he, it's such a long campaign, it's 6 weeks to campaign for. If he was going to take this element of surprise, why not make it in 2 weeks? Yeah. And then Labour are sort of caught on the hop. So I think a lot of people are confused by why he's used this element of surprise, but then had 6 weeks, a long campaign. Yeah. The optics of calling the election as well. I mean, he could have done this at any point. He could have done this today. It's pouring with rain when he goes out. Behind him in Downing Street, he's got a podium, he's got a studio.
Multi-million
There are umbrellas. Ceilings
studio.
exist in this country, but unfortunately, you know, it's pouring with rain. Someone's put the music on for Labour's 1997 election campaign. Things can only get better in the background. So it's just this perfect metaphor of the downfall of a government and someone trying to cling on. And he obviously tried to frame it in terms of, you know, we've gone through the pandemic together, you know, I've never been prouder to be British, while he's been applying for American citizenship during his premiership. You know, I led you with furlough, the war in Ukraine's been going on and we've been given a lot. He's trying to say that, you know, we're together, we can get through this and we can. But I think the overriding element of this is change. People want change. I think that's the general feeling in the country. And I'm just confused, and I think a lot of people are confused as to why he didn't wait until November, December, because anything can happen.
The economy. Inflation figures came out
inflation figures
on
have come
Wednesday.
Out and got better.
Not bad.
But he's basically given himself like a week of runway to say, look, things are getting better. Why didn't he give himself a little bit more? It's quite hard to campaign on such a short amount of statistics and one announcement that inflation is going down a little bit. Why didn't he wait for a couple of more months? Because who knows, that inflation could continue to go down, the economy could continue to get better.
Well, that's what the IMF suggests.
And why not give himself a little bit more runway to actually have a campaign? It's almost like he's throwing in the towel a little bit and being like, I cannot face a winter campaign.
Well, the letters of no confidence were piling in, apparently.
Maybe there's an element of things are going to get worse, actually. We need to do this sooner rather than later, because which is quite a depressing thing to campaign on, right? Things are going to get worse if we don't do this now.
Is he going to get a fair chance, Simon? Because To be fair, of course, all the polls are saying Sir Keir Starmer, head and shoulders above, he is the Prime Minister in waiting. But he's also got a lot of questions to answer because a lot of people are still confused at which Sir Keir Starmer is going to be Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think, and let's not forget that things can happen in campaigns.
Yeah.
They always do. You've got
Absolutely.
the John Prescott punch, you've got Gordon Brown on the hot mic. Things will happen in this one as well.
Yeah.
And with social media, it's going to be much
Deep
more amplified than it ever has. Exactly. So I think things will happen for Labour. And I think maybe that's the reason that they're doing a longer campaign, is Rishi wants to see, are they going to slip up? Is Sir Keir going to say something? Is Rachel Reeves going to be embarrassed by something? He's going to maybe try and put the
debates,
turn the pressure. There may be some TV debates. We don't know that yet. So things will happen during the campaign, but it's a 20-point lead at least for Labour, and it's really hard to see how they can turn that around, the Conservatives. And like I said, I think the driving narrative in this is it's time for a change. Rishi Sunak is going to try and turn that around and say, I am changing the Conservative Party, I'm changing the country for the better, but it's quite hard to campaign on 14 years of Conservative rule and to pretend that he's the one to change it. I think most people think Labour are the ones to change it, and it's going to be interesting to see how they try and turn that around, because as we've been talking about week after week, Rishi Sunak is trying anything and everything in the book to try and, turn this around, and nothing seems to have worked so far.
Yeah, it's going to be a long 6 weeks, but of course, we've got our nose to the ground, haven't we?
It's going to be interesting.
It's going to be interesting. Thanks, Simon.
Let's remain with this topic, examining the issues which will determine the outcome of the vote taking place on Thursday, the 4th of July. Professor Prem Sikka, a sitting member of the House of Lords, joins me now for more on this.
Professor Prem Sikka, thank you so much for taking your time out today. Talk to me, please, about your predictions for the election campaign. It is likely to get nasty, I foresee. What do you think the expected outcomes are going to be, and how you think it will shape the future of UK politics?
Well, good morning. Yes, I think many people have wanted an election for a long time, and it is bad for any country to really have the same party in office for 14 years. So what might be the outcome? Well, if opinion polls are anything to go by, Labour, which is the official opposition, currently has a lead of about 20 to 25%. If that is translated in the actual real vote, that would suggest that a Labour government would be in office after the next election. But that presupposes that the turnout would be high. I think a lot of people are really disillusioned with politics. And on many issues, there isn't really a great deal of difference between what the Conservatives are saying and what the Labour Party is saying. I think it's a case of, it's a bit of a shame to say this, but political parties are saying, well, we can manage a decline better than the other one.
Yes.
So, but we need more progressive approach, really. So that is how I see the issues at the moment.
If we go back, Professor, to 2019, it was mostly about Brexit, right? I think we can all agree on that. Now, of course, it's all about the economy. But I agree with you that there does appear to be voter apathy. Do you think that, low interest rates, the fact that we've come out of the shallow recession is enough for Rishi Sunak to change or prevent some people from voting for Labour?
I don't think any of that's going to be enough. It's not just the issues about interest rates. Let's look at the average real wage. It is lower than in 2008. We have had austerity for 14 years, and the wealth has been sucked upwards. 1% of the UK population has more wealth than 70% of the population combined. There are about 7.6 million unfilled hospital appointments because hospitals simply don't actually have the resources. There are 2.8 million people chronically ill, unable to work. And we have 4.3 million children living in poverty, 12 million people in poverty. That is about 20% of the population. So I think most people have seen their living standards decline, and people would be keen to see a reversal of that. And that really poses a challenge for the Labour Party, because though it wants to encourage economic revival, it said we won't tax the rich more, we won't borrow more money, we won't create money, but we want economic growth. That then poses a puzzle. How on earth is this party actually going to do it? I think they will have to really probably rethink their policies in due course. But at the moment, they're riding a wave of, on the crest of a wave of anti-conservative sentiments, and they think they will get into office in that. But they're facing real negative indicators in the economy and society generally. Society is thoroughly polarized. I can't remember this kind of polarization for the last 50 years.
Wow. It's all to play for, isn't it? Professor Prem Sikka, who is a sitting member of the UK House of Lords. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. Before we head to the break, let's check the temperature a little further away from the Isles. To help us with this, I'm now being joined by Harry Burns. He's the Vice President of Crestview Strategy, and he joins me from Kigali in Rwanda. Harry Burns, thank you, as always, for joining me on Channel's Business Global. I think you were possibly the first, I suppose I could call you a political commentator, to call that this election would be happening in July. You were absolutely right. What do you think are going to be some of the key issues during the campaign?
Thanks, Juliana. Yeah, I mean, I think lots of people thought it was going to be later on in the year because they thought that the headwinds might be behind Rishi Sunak going into that election in the autumn. But clearly, because of less than expectedly good results economically wise, I think Rishi thought that it would now be the best time to take the plunge and go for an election, which obviously took lots of people off guard. But clearly, the issues that Rishi Sunak is going to want to make the election about is about that the country has, he says, under him, has turned a corner economically, that inflation is going down, that they're going to be able to start investing again in public services, and also that he's getting a handle on the small boat crossings. He thinks that I would imagine his assessment was if he waited until after the summer, then inflation possibly could go back up again, and it could be clear that the small boat crossings are going to continue in the way that they have previously. So we thought now would be the time to take a plunge. And he's going to try and set the election up as a choice between him, a man with a plan, and Keir Starmer, a man who he says has no plan at all for government. So he's going to try and make it a choice between, better the devil you know, rather than the untested Keir Starmer, who he says doesn't have a policy platform that he's laid out for the country.
How do you think the political landscape in Britain has changed from the time when it was Corbyn versus Johnson to what it's going to be like Starmer versus Sunak?
Well, my first election was in 2010, and since then, the tone of the debate has definitely deteriorated. I think Brexit was a large part to do with that, but also having the two polarising figures of Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn in the 2019 election just really polarised the country in a way that we hadn't seen for a very long time. The tone of the debate was particularly nasty because you had Boris Johnson, who was making a play for traditional Labour voters, who were disenchanted by Jeremy Corbyn and what they perceived was his lack of pride in the nation and his lack of support for British institutions. So Johnson made a play for those voters who took a plunge and voted Conservative for the first time ever in 2019 in what is called the Red Wall, which is the Midlands and the northern seats in the UK. So Starmer is hoping that by realigning Labour with traditional Labour values, by making it a patriotic party once again and proud of the flag and proud of our institutions, that he's going to manage to get these voters back. But clearly it's going to be a hotly contested election. I don't think it's going to be quite as fractious as 2019 because Brexit was still a live issue back then, which really divided the country. I think Brexit and the feelings around Brexit has dissipated a little bit. And have gone away slightly from the debate. So it's a bit more sort of, two more conventional politicians arguing about policy as opposed to the large ideological splits that we saw in 2019.
We're going to have a busy few weeks here in the UK. And of course, we're going to need all the support we can get from commentators like you, Harry Burns, who, of course, isn't just a political commentator or scientist. He is the Vice President of Crestview Strategy. Thank you so much for your time and insights today, Harry.
Thank you.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, under the theme Creative Industry as a Vehicle for Economic Growth, Prominent leaders from across various sectors in Nigeria gathered in London last weekend to participate at the Duke's Economic Summit. We were there with our camera and we'll be sharing some of the backstage highlights with you. And I'll be sharing a discussion I had earlier in the week with Dr. Anino Emuwa, the founder of 100 Women at Davos. She spoke about women philanthropists in Africa and how they have become instrumental in driving social change and supporting community development. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Last weekend, the Duke Economic Summit, themed Creative Industry as a Vehicle for Economic Growth, was held in the British capital. The summit featured an impressive lineup of keynote speakers, panel discussions and interactive workshops seeking to create a roadmap for Nigeria's future prosperity by leveraging on the creative sector.
Let me thank the group that have put up this program and are responsible also for the play we're going to see after. Nodi Boma is there. Please, a very big round of applause for her. She did wonderful. We also thank the Khalifa himself, Mohammed Sanusi II, the 14th Emir of Kano, for gracing this occasion and for his wonderful remarks.
It's something I think we should encourage. As I said, from my days in the central bank, we have thought of a fund for Nollywood. And the idea is that we keep talking about diversifying our export base and our exports. And we do have these huge exports of cultural products and cultural goods that are not being properly managed. And if we seriously focus on them, and it's not just movies, it's also paintings, it's also writings, okay? I mean, culture is such a broad range of goods that UNESCO captures that we are not properly monitoring. And if we did that and people actually had a proper livelihood out of that, we would create jobs and we would boost our economic growth. And as I said, for us as Africans who have been the victims of slavery and colonialism, we have internalized this self-hate, a sense of inferiority, where we think that the only way we can be real human beings is to efface our culture and adopt foreign cultures. So it's important that we live and step out into this new confident world where we remain who we are, but also live in the modern world and assert as part of our humanity that our culture and our history is something we're not going to efface. So I think things like this are very important. These stories need to be told and we need to come and participate.
One last question. Almost a year in office, the President. How would you review the state of the economy?
Look, I say that if you set very high expectations for yourself or unrealistic expectations, you'll get disappointed. There's no way the damage that has been done to this economy in the last 8 to 10 years, there's no way it's going to be cured in 1 year. And I think part of the problem is that Nigerians expected that once you had a new government and you had Tinubu in office, then all these problems will disappear. So the important thing is, what are the steps the government is taking? What are the policies it is taking? Removal of subsidies is not about a policy, it's about about something that is
subsidy removal. Did that happen?
But it's something that's unsustainable. Okay, at the end of the day, you cannot. And even if it's not been fully removed, it's only because the pain is probably too much. But I suppose with Dangote refinery, and if we can get the prices down, we should be able to remove that. And you need to basically repair the government's balance sheet. You need to repair the central bank's balance sheet. No company can operate without capital. And so long as you keep eroding government revenues, okay, on things that are not sustainable and funding yourself with debt, you're not going to have a sustainable economy. So there will be pain, and I think if anybody believed that adjustment will not be painful, then that person didn't know what was coming.
Now to my final topic. African women in philanthropy are making substantial contributions to the continent's development by addressing critical issues, empowering communities and advocating for social change. Dr. Anino Emuwa, founder of 100 Women at Davos, dropped by the studio on Monday to tell me more about her new philanthropic initiative.
First of all, Juliana, thank you very much for having me on your show here today. Women in Philanthropy Impact Africa came out of the launch of Africa Women CEOs Network. the London branch. We have been in operations now for about 5 years, and we decided to open the London branch. And we were with this group of amazing women, 12 of us, and 3 of them are actually heading foundations. And one of the key and important women in this initiative is the head of the chair of the Nigeria Philanthropy Office in Nigeria, Thelma Kiyo. And we're talking about the role of philanthropy and impact in Africa in driving systemic change, because this is an area that is really not covered by the private sector or the public sector. And a lot of entrepreneurship, especially female entrepreneurship, actually falls into this space with lack of funding. Yeah. It was only a natural discussion to actually say that, look, who are the women who are in this space? And then we suddenly realized, and I asked the question, is there a network? And the answer was no. And we thought instantly, this is something that we have to do. And so it came out of that, and we immediately rallied around, got women from across the continent heading foundations or involved in the space, and here we are today. But this is it. I mean, you're absolutely right to begin with, in the sense of the role of the woman has actually been very often, right, in our continent, in terms of bringing people together, during this kind of events and supporting financially as well. But in the formal space, not enough is being done. There's a bit of a misunderstanding of what philanthropy is in Africa. Very often people think about it in terms of charity. Charity is a type of philanthropy, but it's very different. It relates to things at a specific point in time. But philanthropy deals with systemic issues that have underlying causes that need to be addressed. And this is what we intend to do. But by not having, I mean, we have a lot of women in the space, but by not having a network, the visibility is low. When visibility is low, access to funding is also low. And we see what women are doing globally, and I think it's important that women in Africa in philanthropy are actually plugged in to the global space to bring visibility and to have more structure about some of those social impact initiatives that we can help to bring about and really to get funded. Well, if we look at the data, very sadly, when it comes to women in political leadership and even in management, very sadly, Nigeria trails. We are 100 and something.
Strange. So
not enough is being done, even though we know we have extremely powerful people.
Yes.
But speaking about our president, and this was, within a meeting, and I am delighted that I was able to address this point with him directly.
Wow.
And this was a few months ago after he came into power and after inauguration, and this was in France. Yes. And I loved his response. And he started off immediately by saying that my mother was a single mother, and I saw what she did for me.
Wow.
And so he had all the numbers, he had the data, so he was very conscious of it. So what I think we have seen so far is some very strong women who are actually in government right now. So the cabinet, right, is much better than we've seen in the past, but still not enough. And part of the reason is one, yes, you can appoint women to these positions, but it's more than that. The pipeline is really very important, and this is where we've had barriers. The pipeline of women into coming into the houses, into Senate, for example, the House of Assembly, has really been very difficult. Yeah. And I think that these are the areas where we need to make sure we remove those and dismantle those barriers, not just from a sense of justice that women also want to be in leadership, but in a sense of inclusion for our country, because the data over and over shows that when you have more women in political leadership, in power, that the social and the economic benefits are such that it's better for everyone, men and women. So a lot needs to be done. The president has started, but we also need to look at, the houses, for example, and the political parties and what they do to allow women to rise to those positions where they can be elected. I think the thing is to let women know that you can have it all, but just possibly not at the same time. If you look at the career trajectories of women compared to men, there's this slow climb to the top, and then they get to the top and there's a cliff, right? With women, it's more like a wave, because there are things that get probably in the way. But then what happens is the career history of women very often is much longer. So we have the most amazing women who are global leaders from in Africa, people like Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Amina Mohammed, Christine Lagarde, for example. There's so many women in top levels. And if you look at their ages, they're in the 60s and beyond. Yeah. So the career lifespan of women has lengthened. And so the advice is really, You can have it, maybe not at the same time, but you can have it all. It's not about a race, it's a marathon. It's getting there in the end.
Yeah, we've got lots to look forward to, haven't we? It's
absolutely
such a pleasure speaking with you, Dr. Anino. I wish we had more time, but we certainly will be speaking to you again, and I'm sure you'll be back. Especially, no, you have a London chapter. You have a London chapter, so certainly you'll be here very soon, and we'll have an update. Dr. Anino Emua, who is the founder of 100 Women at Davos, as well as the founder of Africa Women CEO Network. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Juliana.
Thank you. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.